Welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. I hope we had enough time to have a bite and have a very fruitful conversation. Not just a single conversation, but lots of fruitful conversations. I think we have been doing very well so far. 2 days where it has been intense and it has been active. And this is going to be the very first time that I might call on the teams which are supporting us, and I want to thank them very much. All the teams of the Secretariat of the School Meals Coalition who have been working in the background to put everything together, and also the teams of the organizing committee here from our hosts, the French government, working so hard behind the scenes. And this will be the first time that I call on them to say, if it's possible, just remind all the members who are still outside wrapping up with their lunch to join us in here. It's the very first time I'm doing that. It's amazing how wonderful and brilliant you've all been. So I take a couple of minutes just to indicate that we are basically in that final stretch, really this time, of the full marathon. And we are into the very last plenary session of the day, which is aimed at providing a deep dive into each initiative and how they support governments in achieving their goals and how to engage with them. So you are seeing right here on stage the biggest panel that we've had since we started. And it's because we are wrapping it up. We're bringing it all together. We've had lots of time to be engaged, to talk about governments, to talk about civil society. We have listened to the children themselves talk. We have even seen heads of states, heads of governments and institutions making commitments in videos. We have seen municipalities come together. We've heard from parliamentarians. Now is the time to bring it all together. And this is that session before the end. The coalition's initiatives, how do they work and what can they do for governments? This is what is important. And here with us on this stage, we've got the Research Consortium, the Sustainable Financing Initiative. We've got representatives from Cambodia, Cote d'Ivoire, Rwanda, the Sun Movement, FAO, the Consortium's Nutrition Measurement Community of Practice. And of course, we've got the moderator of this very high-level panel. And we could not ask anyone else because she has been behind the scenes working for several years on this. She knows the people. She knows that this is the moment when it comes together. Carmen Burbano, who is the face of the Secretariat of the School Meals Coalition, she will be the moderator of this final plenary. Over to you, Carmen, and a round of applause to all of us who made it back here on time.
Thank you so much, George. It's a pleasure to have. Of course, it's difficult to have the last session because it's also just after lunch. We all know how how challenging that can be, but it is a pleasure for me to close the last session of the summit because I'm surrounded by friends, and it's lovely to be here. So when we were talking about the different plenaries that we were going to have in the summit, one of the things that was very important for us in the coalition ecosystem was to make sure that we don't let all of you go, and particularly government leaders that are here. And I want to thank you because you've been in the front row, second row, third row the entire time. So that is a clear sign of your commitment and your interest in these topics. I want to say this session was specifically designed to answer many of the questions that might be in your mind of what kind of support can I get to do the things that I now want to do when I go back home. You've been sitting here for 2 days listening to all these great ideas. You've been sitting and also talking to each other in the coffee breaks and the lunch breaks. And I can bet that you have somewhere either in your notebooks or in your phones a huge list of things that you want to do when you go back home. And I can also bet that you have somewhere in the back of your mind a question of, oh my God, how the hell am I going to pull this off? What kind of support is available? What other partners are doing, and who can I reach out to for what? So this session is specifically for that. I was mentioning yesterday that the coalition was set up. It is an ecosystem to support governments to reach their commitments, to implement what they want to implement. And if you remember the video that I presented to you the first day, when we created the coalition, it was quite clear from what member states were discussing that there were 3 very important challenges that we needed to start with, that we needed to set up some mechanism to provide you with support. And those became the first 3 initiatives of the coalition: the Research Consortium, the Sustainable Financing Initiative, and the Data and Monitoring Initiative. And we're here to talk about some of that. You heard yesterday, and I'm sure they will reiterate that in the closing session, Brazil has announced a 4th new initiative under the coalition, and we will be bringing news about that to you in the next few months once we take forward all the proposals that have been coming up through the summit. But for the moment, what I wanted to do, and what we want to do here in this panel, is discuss particularly what kind of support is available. We also have a very important conversation that we'll have about nutrition. We started to hear that in the last panel, but we have members here of the nutrition community, of our sister agency FAO, and others that are also here and part of the coalition that are supporting governments in particularly reaching their nutrition-related goals and extending support throughout the 8,000 days. So the first part of this very intricate panel, and I have a huge responsibility, I think, of making sure that we don't go over time. As you can see, it's going to be hugely challenging for me. The first part of it is called the Dawn, Liesbet, and Carmen show. We did this in Helsinki. It worked really well, and we have a bit of a chat for you just to get us started. So let's kick us off first with Dawn. The Research Consortium was the first initiative that was launched. Even actually before the coalition itself was launched, you were already up and running, Dawn. So tell us why. Why were you set up? What is the purpose of the Research Consortium, and what can it do for governments and partners?
Okay, so I don't think this microphone is on.
Oh, sorry, I can share mine.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak in this exciting session as we head towards the end. And I just wanted to say then that the Research Consortium's mission is to collect evidence and share evidence. That's its primary mission. And that we do that by, and this is going to be the important theme that I'm going to really explore, by having a global network of academics, of scholars, of practitioners working together. That it's a new thing. We've never had a school meals consortium that focuses on those technical issues. It's not even something that exists in universities as a department. So this is something new that we're having to create here, and we're creating something that's also independent in the sense that it's independent of any particular agenda. This is to help create the agenda or co-create the agenda. And we see our task as having two goals, two connected goals. One is to assemble the evidence, And secondly, to convert that evidence into guidance that's actually useful for countries. Both those goals are necessary. People always talk about evidence-based guidance, but you need the evidence first, but then you do need to have it in a way that you can share. How do we go about collecting that evidence? How do we go about sharing the guidance? We've created a range of communities of practice, and I'm going to be given a little time later on to talk through what those are. But what that actually means is communities of practice are groups of people worldwide who are communicating with each other on a specific topic. So, for example, we have a community of practice on impact. We have a community of practice on analytics and metrics. We'll go into some of that in some detail, but that's about how we get together the goal one evidence. Sometimes we're collecting evidence that already exists. So when we do systematic reviews, we're collecting information that's already out there. Sometimes we're collecting information which is case studies from countries. So we're trying to see what it is how countries are implementing the programs. But then having got that evidence, the next part is guidance. And that's where I want to talk about a whole other set of partnerships. We heard from IPNED this morning. They're going to be a crucial partner in reaching out to parliamentarians with that kind of advice. But also, there are very well-established groups that already do this for a living. And I wanted to particularly highlight in Brazil, the Center of Excellence Against Hunger, and in West Africa, SURFAM. So working with those is our key area. And you wanted me to talk about the bottlenecks?
Yeah, just probably one bottleneck, because we do need to move forward. Yep.
So one bottleneck is simply that work on school-age children and adolescent health is only, when we did a review of the literature, only 10% of the literature on the health of children is from that age group. 10%. Nearly all of the literature, 90% of the literature, is on children who are much younger. That's where most of it is, on infants, and those who are older adolescents. The group we work on, the group we all work on, is the most neglected in the health literature. There's a major problem.
Yeah, so that was one of the major insights, I think, that came out of the work that you led in 2018, which was published under Disease Control Priorities. The publication that really kind of ignited a lot of this was the realization that we had a huge gap. We had a huge gap in the research and the evidence base, but also the amount of resources that were being put to these programs. So I think we're going to hear a lot more about the Research Consortium and what you're doing in that part of the space. But on the other side, and this has been a huge topic of conversation, I think, in pretty much all of the panels, is another big bottleneck, which is the financing. And the session that was led by Christina yesterday, I think, was superb in terms of underlying what the challenges are, what the potential solutions are. But there's a specific initiative under the coalition that was set up to support this. So tell us a little bit more about the Sustainable Financing Initiative, Liesbet, that you lead, and what kind of support that you are providing to governments.
Do I speak through this? Great. Well, first of all, I wanted to just thank everybody for staying around. I heard the final stage of the marathon. I actually don't feel like that. I'm not tired. I'm very excited. And I actually think we're going to run out here with even more energy. So I hope you feel like that too. So on the finance, we've heard a lot about that, as Carmen said. The fiscal space of many of the countries here today, actually of the entire world, is shrinking, is challenging at this point in time. So the Sustainable Financing Initiative is really set up to work collaboratively with countries to think through the costing and the financing strategies for school meals programs. And we are a somewhat younger initiative than the consortium and still bringing our teams together. But essentially, we would like to work with each one of you to think through those strategies. And our first major piece of work that we did last year was actually looking at the financing situation in a sort of aggregate way. It was a landscape analysis. And there were three things that came out of this that we identified and want to continue to work on. The first one is, and I think I alluded to that yesterday, is that many countries have wonderful visions for their school meals expansion, but unfortunately not yet the financing plans to back those visions. And it's challenging because school meals touch upon so many parts of government. And I was talking earlier with the honorable minister next to me from Rwanda, who said, this is not an education issue, it's a whole of government issue, which makes it harder to really figure out how to cost and finance school meals. The second thing is that we need to get smart about presenting financing plans and costing plans because, as we discussed also, we need to convince ministers of finance and we need to convince the rest of government that this is important to invest in. And the striking figure to me has always been that when you look at the cost of school meals on an annual basis, in some countries that's almost equal to the cost of education on per child. But that's not the right way of looking at it because it obviously touches on health outcomes, it touches on economic outcomes, and so the rate of return has to be seen in that multi-sectoral context. So number one, we need better financing plan to back the vision. Secondly, we've talked about this, for each country, the strategies to finance will be different, whether that's earmark taxes, whether that's debt swaps, etc., whether we want to look at taxation in other ways. Each country will need to think through that in its own context. So we want to work with countries to look at those solutions. And then thirdly, there is the big piece of the international community's responsibility in those countries that need support. Because in the long term, as we've all said, we want to make sure that countries can eventually finance school meals themselves, but it will take some time. So figuring out how the international community can plug that gap and how we can be innovative about sourcing that financing. We talked about that yesterday, thinking out of the box about kind of where the funding could come from and how we can plug the gap. So the Sustainable Finance Initiative is ready to work with countries, looking at costing strategies, and we are developing tools to do that, looking at financing strategies, and there is a one-pager, I have been told on the website, that you actually can look at, which gives you the offer of the Sustainable Finance Initiative for countries that you could come to us on. So thank you very much. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Liesbet. Is this working? Yes. So thank you very much. These two initiatives are working very closely together as well, and I wanted to highlight that again in the coalition ecosystem. First of all, they are being led by these two leaders to my right and to the left, but actually they are in and of themselves a network of partners themselves. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that in a second. They were also set up with a specific mandate to support governments directly, and you'll hear from that in a second how that is happening. So this is not a research effort that's happening somewhere in London. It is actually happening in the countries, and that's what we're going to get to. But before we do that, there's one third initiative that I just wanted to mention. We didn't have time to actually talk about the three initiatives completely, but it is a very important initiative. You have been discussing this, I think, in a couple of days, and I have heard in many of your meetings this issue of monitoring, the issue of data, the issue of how do we know if we're going in the right direction? How do we know if this is actually working or not? So the Data and Monitoring Initiative was set up as the third big pillar of the coalition ecosystem. And as a result of the Transforming Education Summit, the good news came up last year that member states decided to revise SDG 4 targets and target indicators. And for the first time, we now have a school meals indicator under SDG 4. So one of the big tasks of that data and monitoring initiative is going to be about that, about how do we measure and how do we report, and how the coalition ecosystem through that data and monitoring initiative is going to be doing that. I want to very briefly, because before we go into the different part of this segment, Don, can you just in a couple of minutes just offer your thoughts about why the data and monitoring piece is so important, because it's also connected to the research consortium and the work that you're doing.
Sure. So we need to start by recognizing that there is no such thing as a global database on school-age children's well-being, nutrition, and so on. That doesn't actually exist as an ongoing process. So it's key. But what's key to the use of it is, of course, that the quality of the data coming out of the countries is strong. So there's two pieces to this. One is going to be agreeing together what are the crucial indicators that need to be collected at the country level. And then secondly, a home for a global database. Now, the World Food Programme has stood up and said that they will maintain this, I mean, that's a fantastic thing. And that database will allow comparison across countries, but it'll also allow countries to look at what other countries are doing and get a sense of their own track in that. And then finally, I wanted to say that the SDG 4, the new indicator, will also need tracking, and we need this database to track that indicator. So all of these things come together in this very important new initiative.
Thank you so much. And I think that that's going to be something where it's again going to be a combination of partners and different technical agencies that are going to be working together to institutionalize data. The data may exist, and it actually is already being collected by, for example, partner organizations. You heard from the Global Child Nutrition Foundation earlier today. There's surveys out there, but there is really a need now that school meals, school health and nutrition is recognized as a really important area to institutionalize this within the United Nations system, make sure that there's a robust way of measuring this, and that's the ambition, building on the work that has already been done. Okay, so we've heard a bit about the Research Consortium and the SFI, and that's actually just to open your appetite, I think, a little bit, because I, for one, really want to know how the Research Consortium is doing this, because, of course, you have your network of researchers, you have the universities that have already joined and that are continuing to join, because you are growing as much as the coalition is, Dawn. So we have a few minutes, I think, where you can demonstrate with us and with the countries that you have next to you, how are you practically supporting the countries that are members of the coalition? So over to you. We have about 20 minutes for this segment, and I do need to keep the time. So I am going to ask the speakers to be kind to Don, because otherwise I'm going to have to interrupt him in your session. So be good to him. Over to you.
Thank you for that. Okay, so one thing I wanted to just make clear, because I've been asked several times now, where do you see a copy of the white paper that we were talking about this morning? So that's on the website of the Research Consortium for School Health and Nutrition. So if you Google that, you'll find that website, and you'll find a whole lot more information that will be, I hope, useful to you. So the Research Consortium is here for you. We're here to help work together to collect and share independent advice. But the crucial point is that we are all the Research Consortium. The Research Consortium is made up of academics, scholars, and practitioners across the world who add knowledge around school health and school meals programs. And that's vitally important, that we actually create a global network like that. And I want to say that what we're trying to do is we're kind of network of networks. So we link to networks that are already out there where they exist for school health, or where they exist for something like child nutrition. But we really need to capture the full range of countries and perspectives and contexts. And for that, that's something that's hard to do. We all know that the politics and the power bases, the power relationships tend to favor the North. And we really need to avoid that in the way in which we build this up. And one of the things that my plea to you, and I hope you'll have pleas for me as well, but my plea to you is, please, all of the countries that are part of the coalition, please identify your scholars and academics and encourage them to be part of this network. We reach out as much as we can, but it would help to get some push from your side as well. That's what's going to make this truly representative of this group. So that's, I think, a very important part of what we're asking for. And perhaps we can hope that you can think of your people, your skilled people, as part of your commitment to the coalition, asking some of your skilled people to be part of the consortium. So what are we doing then in the consortium itself? So we collect the evidence, and that's the evidence from the published research, but we're also trying to collect evidence which is on the reality of programs. This is the key piece. And somebody said to me the other day about what sort of research did we have, what evidence did we have that these programs were important? And I said, one of the finest pieces of evidence when you want to test something is not a randomized controlled trial. It is simply to pull the plug on the program and see if things collapse when that happens. And we all did that in the world, didn't we? We all did that in April 2020 when we closed all the schools. We discovered that was catastrophic for education, which was no surprise, but we also discovered it was catastrophic for the well-being of the children. And that evidence, understanding what's happening in national programs, is a key part of what we're trying to get, what we're trying to pull together. So case studies are at the heart of everything we do. Can we, I think we've got some maps that we were going to put up. Perfect. Case studies are at the heart of what we do. We have a community of practice called Good Examples. What it means is, what's actually going on out there? What is it we can describe that's going on in every country? These are the countries that already have undertaken or are undertaking case studies. We need every one of the 90 countries in the coalition. We need all of your countries to be part of this process. So these are the ones we've listed at the moment. But we can also talk about proof of principle here, because every one of these annual meetings, we've produced a statement of the evidence, and that you'll find that in your package in French, Spanish, and English. In here, we do our first analysis of the first case studies that came in and show how those case studies can tell us what are the key things, what are the most important things across all of these national programs. What have we learnt by looking at those programs? So my plea, as I say then, is that we work together to create case studies. And the case studies are led by the Good Examples community of practice. And I would like to us to listen in on a conversation about the Good Examples community of practice. And this will be a conversation between His Excellency Dr. Naron, the Minister of Education for Cambodia, and Professor Sylvia Avalon from Montpellier, who is the chair of the Good Examples community of practice. Sylvie.
Thank you, Don, for this kind of introduction. So we are engaged with 25 countries to describe their program, their challenges, but also their strength. And it's really interesting to have this global overview. So we are happy now to discuss with Cambodia and Your Excellency, Dr. Naron, because we have seen that your country has made great progress during the last months. You have increased the budget allocated to school meals. So we would like to know, what are your plans in the coming years? Are you going to strengthen this program?
So thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers and also the French government for organizing this summit. So I think during the last 2 days, we have heard about the consensus of the importance of school meal and also the way we move forward. And I think that, what I'm going to say, we will resonate among all of you. And first, is to increase the budget for the school meal. Secondly, is to strengthen the existing program in order to, provide quality school meal to the children. Thirdly, maybe to implement school meal as part of the social protection, to protect the vulnerable, to break the cycle of poverty. Thirdly, is to implement the school meal program as part of the nutrition policy, because just meal and we need to maybe incorporate the micronutrients into the meal so that it can conducive to make the young people become social. I think human capital. I think that's very important because sometimes provide just meal is not enough. I think provide meal that can improve their intellectual capacity to become future generation of human capital. And also we need to look at the monitoring and evaluation. And lastly, we need to learn from each other as peer-to-peer learning. But when I go to Ministry of Finance, they will ask me, I have to prioritize. We spend a lot of money on teacher training, on school construction, on on textbook, on teacher salary, which is 80% of the budget, on sanitation, on many things. So they would ask for evidence, and I think that really we must have that clear answer. And I think this is also the role of the research coalition to have that. Basically, not just school meal, but a repertoire of measure that can improve student learning. We have seen that, around the world, maybe 500 million students go to school without learning. So why they can't learn? And I think we invest a lot on many things, but not so much on the ability of the student to learn, because there is a discrepancy between urban and rural. When people live in the rural area, I think they lack that capacity to learn. Students are not ready to learn, and you invest a lot of money in something that in return you may not get. And I think that that's why that evidence is not just on school meal, but on a combination of measures that improve the learning outcome. And I think that what I go back, we will have all that measure, everything that we have discussed. I think there's a consensus already, but we must really provide policy option, a repertoire of how it works together, maybe an ecosystem of learning. And we must understand that ecosystem of learning very well. Otherwise, like this morning, I think the former French Foreign Affairs said that poverty engenders poverty. And we should break the cycle, because kids that live in rural area, infected by poverty, cannot learn.
So thank you. You also underlined the fact that you need research to fill the gap of knowledge. And so the community of practice will help you in this area. And we are happy because you will be the first country of Southeast Asia to join us. So welcome with us.
Excellent. Yes, we can have a clap for that, surely. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. But the point we want to make is that we will work with individual countries to develop those case studies, to make those, to help make those cases. And there's another dimension to it, a very important dimension. There's this figure that we often talk about, that we're partly to blame for, this $1 resulting in a $9 return. That $9 doesn't come from just one sector. That's built up of the returns to education, to health, to human capital, to social protection, and very importantly, to agriculture. All of those things come together. Making that case is a very important piece of, I think, explaining why your investments are worthwhile, particularly to a minister of finance. So that's part of the picture. And one of the ways that we help with thinking about that is doing value for money analyses, and we'll hear more about that also from Liesbet, but value for money analyses in countries. If I could have the next map up. These maps are really to connect with you. What we're trying to do is make it clear that we really are building up a global picture here. So these are the countries that have now are undertaking value for money analyses. Some of these countries are doing this very directly with our community of practice on analytics, and we're supporting teams in those countries. So those are country teams of academics and government working together to look at those analytical pieces. But we're also working with other countries where there's already well-established teams, so that we're getting, again, a global view of what are the real returns we can expect to see from these kinds of programs. And to take that a little further, I'm going to ask the Ambassador Seydou Cisse from Cote d'Ivoire to take part in a conversation with Professor Stéphane Verguet of Harvard, who is the chair of our Value for Money community of practice.
Merci, bonjour à tous, merci Don, c'est vraiment un plaisir d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. Donc dans notre communauté de pratique, Analytics and Metrics, comme Don l'a dit, l'idée c'est vraiment de regarder si vous investissez avec un certain budget dans les cantines scolaires, quel va être le retour multisectoriel, comme il a été dit précédemment, sur l'éducation, très important bien évidemment, la santé, la nutrition, mais aussi l'agriculture locale, avec le procurement local, les dernières sessions ont parlé de ça, et aussi bien évidemment les questions de protection sociale, avec toute la thématique d'équité, etc. Et donc nous avons eu le plaisir d'embarquer avec un certain nombre de pays qui sont sur cette carte derniers mois, et pour vraiment comptabiliser ce retour sur investissement multisectoriel, et en particulier main dans la main, je dirais, dans chaque pays, avec un comité technique et stratégique qui inclut les différents représentants des cabinets ministériels ainsi que des académiques dans les différents pays. Donc c'est mon grand plaisir de demander à l'ambassadeur Cisse, qui est à mes côtés, de nous parler de l'expérience au Côte d'Ivoire. Et je commencerai par cette première question. Si vous pouviez, monsieur l'ambassadeur, décrire dans les grandes lignes qu'est-ce qui est derrière cette étude coût-bénéfice sur l'alimentation scolaire en Côte d'Ivoire.
Je vous remercie. Je voudrais, au nom de la délégation que je conduis, remercier le gouvernement de France et de Finlande qui co-président notre coalition. Et nous nous réjouissons d'être ici et de prendre part à ces échanges. J'avoue que depuis hier, nous avons beaucoup appris des expériences des autres pays, leur approche, le financement, comment il faut pérenniser l'alimentation scolaire. Et c'est une excellente nouvelle pour nous. Et je voudrais dire d'entrée de jeu que mon gouvernement considère les cantines scolaires comme un outil de développement humain. Voilà, le capital humain. Parce qu'il est important de le souligner, c'est que le ministère de l'Éducation, qui est en charge de gérer évidemment les cantines scolaires en Côte d'Ivoire, nous nous rendons compte que c'est 36% des écoles primaires qui sont couvertes et 26% des enfants en âge de scolarisation dans le primaire. Ce n'est pas assez. Évidemment, ici, nous partirons d'ici avec certainement les expériences des autres pays pour pouvoir pratiquement faire face, n'est-ce pas, ou à amplifier pratiquement le financement ou les sources de financement vis-à-vis des cantines scolaires. Et je voudrais aussi dire que ce n'est pas une question seulement du ministère de l'Éducation, puisqu'elle implique les questions de santé, les questions de protection sociale et l'agriculture. Évidemment, quand on parle de cantine scolaire, il faut voir ce que nous servons aux enfants au quotidien en termes de nutrition. Et tout le monde sait que l'impact, connaît les résultats de l'impact pratiquement de l'alimentation scolaire sur les résultats. Parce qu'on a remarqué que dans notre pays, par exemple, dans les écoles où nous avons des cantines scolaires, les résultats scolaires sont les meilleurs. Puisque quand on regarde les couches vulnérables, on se rend compte souvent que, et très souvent, ce qui est servi à l'école, c'est le seul repas quand même assez solide que les enfants souvent ont dans la journée. Donc c'est pour cette raison, je voudrais ici souligner que...
Excusez-moi de vous
Oui,
interrompre.
oui.
Je voulais aussi, si on pouvait cibler sur comment utiliser ces résultats pour la mise en place dans le futur des...
Bon, je pense quand même que, comme j'ai dit d'entrée de jeu, hein, c'est un investissement de la part du gouvernement. Et cet investissement est extrêmement important pour le développement du capital humain et sur le plan économique aussi. Parce que très souvent, on oublie que, d'ailleurs, avec le gouvernement ivoirien, a eu un partenariat avec l'Université de Harvard et le Programme alimentaire mondial que je salue ici au passage, beaucoup de choses ont été faites. Mais nous attendons pratiquement de revoir les stratégies nationales qui ont été mises en place avec le ministère de l'Éducation et d'autres ministères, donc multisectoriels, s'il n'y a pas que seulement le ministère de l'Éducation, comme je disais, pour pouvoir pratiquement renforcer pratiquement la question de l'alimentation scolaire en Côte d'Ivoire.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. Je crois qu'on doit aller sur le programme suivant.
Time rushes on with us, I'm afraid. So I'm going to just ask Noam Angris, will you just stand up for a minute? We're not going to have time to talk. And can I ask you, Samrat Singh, to stand up? These are the chairs for the education group and for the diet and food systems group, communities of practice. They'll be very interested to hear if you have areas of where you would like some assistance. But basically, yeah. Use the website. Use the website.
Thank you, Don. This panel was always going to be very challenging because there's so much information for you that we can't really do justice to everything that the initiatives are doing. But I do want to encourage you to talk to Don, get his information, because he's the gateway to this enormous network of research institutions that are doing so much great work with different countries. Now, Liesbet, tell us a little bit about what the Sustainable Financing Initiative is doing specifically with countries.
And I will take my... I will continue the conversation about the Sustainable Finance Initiative with Her Excellency Claudette Irere, the Minister of State for Education in Rwanda. Great honor and pleasure to be here with you. And what we are going to do is have a little conversation about the work that we've been doing with Rwanda under the Sustainable Finance Initiative, where we've worked with Rwanda on developing their school meals financing strategy. So Minister, I'll first of all turn to you to ask you a little bit to explain to the audience. I know you've said many things before, but the National Comprehensive School Feeding Policy, which was established in 2019, had this ambitious target to expand school meals in an amazing way. Could you tell us a little bit about that? How is that going? And maybe you could add also what are the specific financing challenges that you see as you are rolling this out?
Thank you, Liesbet. I'll dive right into it. Yes, Rwanda is guided by the National Comprehensive School Feeding Policy. Like any other government, if you want anything to really get implemented, you make sure it's part of your policy. But then also you follow what the policy says and you put the money around it as well. But then with the Sustainable Financing Initiative, we're able to also develop what we call operational guidelines, because we're not going to just have a policy, put the money, but then how are we going to do it? Today, we are feeding every child that goes to school in Rwanda. That's about 3 million students every single day. And we've taken on the approach of there are government subsidies, and then there's also parents' contributions. The government subsidies are desegregated based on the student levels. So for instance, in pre-primary and primary schools, this is, basic of the basics. We ensure that government subsidy is up to 90%. So parents are only contributing 10% of the cost. So if you put it in a dollar value, they only contribute, I would say $1 per quarter, so per 3 months. And they can contribute in any form. But then in secondary, because they are a little bit older, the government contributes up to 85%, and then parents contribute 15%. And in secondary, that's where we have boarding. A few schools are boarding facilities, and so there we're not only providing lunch, we're also providing, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because this is, boarding. And then in the day schools, because we have government day schools, so secondary day schools where they go and return back home, that's where government is contributing up to 85%. And then in boarding schools, government only contributes 5%. This is important because as they go in these levels, then their needs, their nutrition needs, and the quantities, the portions, they vary. And so we were able to come up with a formula that addresses that. But of course, it's not only us. We work with the World Food Program. We work recently with the Sustainable Financing Initiative. And we work with our own internal support systems to ensure that what we're doing is actually responding to this. And why did we do it? In 2019, when we started, we were only feeding secondary going students. But 2020 and 2021, COVID hits, economic situation of the families becomes something else. And so the government had to step up. And we don't think we're going to stop anytime soon. Maybe we will do some variations around the subsidies, but not stopping anytime soon, because we've seen the value. I was actually discussing with her earlier that before, we're still experiencing some of these. The dropout rates were high, but now we have a different problem. We have overcrowding rates, because as you feed the children, they all want to come to school. Parents all of a sudden sees this as an opportunity, and it's the other way around. So we're now, pushed to increase the infrastructure and everything. And then you mentioned that I also talk about some of the financing.
Yeah, if you could say a little bit what was that experience like, and how has it helped you in especially convincing your Minister of Finance and maybe the rest of government? What's the value of having a financing strategy to you?
Thank you. A financing strategy is very important. Maybe to just talk briefly about how the governance structure in Rwanda is set up. We have the central government, but we also have decentralized entities. And so whatever we plan for at the central government, we earmark these funds to the district, to the decentralized entities. We have about 30 districts. Rwanda is very small, so there was a tiny dot on on the professor's map, Rwanda is very small, but we have about 30 districts across the country, and those are, these are the local government authorities. And so we earmark the funds to the district, to the different districts, depending on the number of schools, the number of students that they have. So everything is really counted down to that level. However, this is good. And I wanted to just talk about, in 2020, the budget was about 27 million US dollars. Today, it has tripled. So it's almost 90 million US dollars. And we know it's not going to stop because of the inflation rates and all these other pressures that we're seeing. And so we need to rethink on how to best finance this, because as I said, we're not going to stop. We will relook at the variations of the subsidies, but stopping is out of equation right now. The other challenges that we see, cooking is done at the school level. So I think the mayor or the governor of Nairobi earlier talked about how it's done efficiently. There are centralized kitchens and everything. So in Rwanda, cooking is done at the school level. And if it's done at the school level, this puts pressure on the environment, as you can understand, because you have to think about clean cooking. How do you clean cook and make sure you are not, punishing the environment because you are feeding the children. And so we'd like to see how we marry the climate financing, but with the school feeding. And I think a lot of people talked about this earlier, because one should not harm the other, because they are equally important. So we need to be smart enough to see how we create something that speaks to these. And then another thing that where we have challenges, like I said, the decentralized entities are the ones that are doing the day-to-day follow-up of the school feeding. Unfortunately, we still call it school feeding, but we will change. We will change the naming. But they're not supported. So in terms of capacity building, yes, in terms of enough resources, and we think it's about time, as we move into really getting them to own the process, the entire value chain, creating and producing some of the foods, in their own decentralized entities. We'd like to see them empowered to do this on their own. Of course, the government support will not stop, but then how do we empower the local entities, the local government entities, to do this and on a daily and consistent basis? The last one is, financing the nutrition side of the things. It's important, yes. It's good to make sure that students are fed. But I think I heard in the session in the morning talking about this. But then how do you ensure that, when you're doing this, you're combating malnutrition, stunting, and everything that goes with this? And so we will need to also rethink around how we provide really nutritious alternatives that fill the children's tummies, but also that keep them, healthy. And this is a challenge that we're always innovating around. And then, of course, looking at the grant support, like I said, the national budget has tripled in the last 3 years, and we know it's going to continue to do that. So how do we continuously support the government? I think in the last 3 years, we've shown that it's possible. That we can institutionalize school feeding across all entities, and now the partners who would want to come in will know that it's actually doable. And so this is the time when we call on the partners to really come in and support with instruments that are affordable and that everyone can tap in, because we know it works, and we've seen that if you sort of institutionalize this, make sure that it's part of your procurement processes, then there's no waste, there's no stealing, there's no theft, there's nothing. You can actually make the most out of this. Thank you.
Well, you've made some amazing points about the need for costing and financing strategies. Your point about the thinking long term, because we're on a long journey, and continued expansion will have continued finance needs. You talked about the different food baskets, which is again a consideration that the financing plans can look into. What are the different food baskets? When you add more nutrition, how does that impact costs? You talked about obviously the different ways to finance and how to plug the financing gaps in the long and short term. Maybe a final question is your experience. You've clearly managed to convince your Minister of Finance. What message do you have for all of the people in the room here who need to convince their Minister of Finance? What are your lessons learned in terms of really making this a priority for Rwanda?
Thank you. Earlier, I was joking with her that we did not convince, we forced. But really, there was no alternative, you know. And the minute everyone sees this as an important aspect to the economy, to the security, to the social, it's important that it's not looked at as a Ministry of Education challenge or endeavor, but it's looked at as a wholesome government initiative. And this is what we did in Rwanda. The school feeding or school meals is not just a Ministry of Education, it's an entire government undertaking. It's taken at a multi-sectoral level, where the Ministry of Finance, just as an experience, we had to sit down in the Ministry of Finance and go into the diet, the actual diet and costing of it. You know, this is an exercise that the ministers themselves sat down to do because of the importance of this. If we were going to do it, how affordable was it going to be, and how does the government respond to this? There's also maybe one message to other governments is it's possible. It's a political will that has to be there, and secondly is to ensure part of the sustainability is to institutionalize this program and ensure that it's part of every single structure that you have in the country, because then it raises awareness and everyone wants to do it. And then we need to also look at it again, not as a Ministry of Education endeavor, but as a government endeavor. And earlier I told her that for us, we look at it, if we don't feed the children, then they're not going to come to school. Well, or maybe the other way around, it's a chicken and an egg analogy. But if they don't come to school, then they don't have anything to do. If they don't have anything to do, they become, for us, a security threat. So it's not longer around social issues, because if they don't have anything to do, anyone can attract them to do whatever. And for us, these are things that we take very seriously. And so it's not just about feeding the children, it's really ensuring that there's capacity, development, but at a government level, and everyone goes in, not just the Ministry of Education, but everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. You are an inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I think connecting a little bit some of the themes, and particularly what these initiatives are providing is, on the one hand, the documentation of the best practice, the calculation of the return on investment that then gets turned into arguments for ministers of finance. Policies need to be costed. They need to have a strategy behind them of how much are they going to cost, where's that money going to come from? And that's kind of the whole chain of connections between evidence, technical assistance to provide that kind of support for governments to make the decisions that you've just discussed. I have to acknowledge Rwanda, when President Kagame joined the School Meals Coalition, this was at the very beginning of 2021, the beginning of the coalition. He joined with a commitment, as you just mentioned, of covering all the children in the country. At that moment, Rwanda was covering 600,000 children, I believe. They have gone to covering 3.8 million children in just 2 years. I mean, it's just incredible. So thank you and congratulations for your leadership and for the conviction, I think, of the entire government that this is a very important investment. We've been discussing during the last couple of days, and it is the most powerful piece of this conversation, the issue that it touches upon so many sectors and that it has so many benefits to different elements. So we heard from UNESCO, from Stefania Giannini earlier, about how this is such an important contribution to education, and we heard it echoed again today. There's been a conversation, and you just brought it up, the issue of security, stability. How do these programs also help the state make sure that there's a connection with citizens? The creation of trust with the state and state institutions is another really powerful reason why governments tell us that they do these programs. There's the connection to food systems that we discussed this morning that have been, I think, the thread of a lot of the conversations, connecting with the value chains, farmers, job creation. We heard a lot about that. And now I wanna bring a very important new dimension, or existing dimension, which is the diet nutrition dimension to these programs. So just remembering that this is connected to the education sector, it's connected to the health sector, it's connected to the agriculture sector, it's something that social protection sector is also involved in. As you're mentioning, this is not just about one sector, it's not just about the Minister of Education. And this is why we've seen, when these programs are scaled up, and you've seen the announcements of many of these countries in this summit, it's because that decision was likely taken at the very highest levels. This is a presidential decision, this is a prime ministerial decision, and that is because it is at that level of leadership that they can basically see the entire government, the entire reason why these programs would be implemented would be various sectors connected together. But I want to focus the last piece of the conversation on this issue of nutrition, because when I started and when I mentioned to you yesterday when we were opening the summit, that this, of course, is not the only thing that children need. Children throughout their first 1,000 days of life need to get support. This is a very important window of opportunity of getting them to a stage in which they go to school and they are ready to learn as well. So it's part of a continuum. And here we have three colleagues and different representatives of different agencies and partners that are going to illuminate a little bit this topic for us. And I really want to thank our colleague Afshan Khan from the Scaling Up Nutrition Movement. She's our UN Assistant Secretary General for the Sun Movement. And thank you so much for making the time to be with us today. This part of the conversation is super important. So can you just tell us a little bit about this growing realization that there is a continuum, there's a connection between the first 1,000 days and the next 7,000 days, which is what we've been discussing here?
So first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I've listened for the last day and a half and been really excited by the conversations that are happening. I'd like to thank the government of France and Finland, as well as WFP for organizing this. As you know, Scaling Up Nutrition is a movement of 66 governments and 4 Indian states that's nationally led. And like you just spoke about, Carmen, many of the national nutrition coordinators are either in the office of the president or the office of the prime minister, to facilitate this cross-sectoral approach to better nutrition outcomes. And this nationally led, nationally driven, nationally costed, and largely nationally financed elements, I think, are things we really need to understand better, because that's what will ensure sustainability of these many programs. When I think about the life cycle approach that you asked about, obviously, even before a child is born, I would start with the adolescent girl. It's so important that that young girl has the right type of food, the right type of micronutrients, and the right type of nutrition, so that when a child is born, that child is born healthy, not underweight. If a child is born underweight, the likelihood of having malnutrition later on increases exponentially. Then the first 1,000 days that I think many have spoken to very eloquently, partly because the research and the evidence, as we talk about that, speaks so clearly to this being the first point of a strong cognitive brain development. And the second point being in the adolescent years, and that's why I think the research that's being done looking at 14 to 18 years and what happens to brain development then, and why nutrition in that period is so important, will be equally key. But while I was excited about the school meals is because we talked so intrinsically about a systems approach, an interconnected approach that requires collaboration across sectors, a true multi-stakeholder endeavor, and I think the Minister of State from Rwanda was very eloquent about that, that links health, food systems, social protection, water and sanitation, and education to create an environment where children can thrive. And we have several sun countries in the room, including Cambodia and Cote d'Ivoire, who have highlighted how school meals can help catalyze broader transformations. So during the past few days, we've heard about purchasing locally from smallholder farmers, creating opportunities for community employment, creating opportunities for a better green environment that looks at a healthy, nutritious diet that doesn't cost the earth. And in that, I mean both an affordable diet and a diet that is able not to harm planet. And school meals, given the level of what we've heard about of procurement and the extent, have an important role to play in mitigating some of the climate change and some of the climate issues we're facing. I would also say that what a child eats during that school meal and the behaviors, whether it's hand washing, whether it's a good nutritious diet, whether it's building on the 5 food groups that are so essential in the first 1,000 days of life, to recognize that a healthy, plant-based, often affordable diet, and again, I'm reminded of Rwanda and the investment in beans, but also protein like eggs, an egg a day, for many children can make a difference in terms of their own nutrition, the nutrition value in the school meal. But very importantly, it influences behaviors. And later on in life, teaches people how to eat well. And I raise this because we're also facing a second dimension, which I didn't hear come up as much as I would have expected. Many of the countries, sun countries, but also where there's school feeding programs, we're dealing with issues around overweight and obesity. And it's extremely important that the School Meals Coalition in its work focus on the issue of healthy diet, and when there is government procurement, that we're not procuring food that is of low quality, high sugar, high fat content, low nutrient value. Because in the long term, we'd be doing a disservice, not just for the children, but for the broader health system as a whole. And I see that as a real challenge. Everything has a bit of a point counterpoint. And one of the dilemmas around school feeding is going to be affordability. And that's why the local procurement piece becomes so key. But in urban areas, we're going to have to look at also making sure that that diet is healthy and nutritious, so we don't end up creating a health problem later down the pike. And lastly, I would say that on the research and evidence piece, it's going to be extremely important, I think, to have clear data on the value and the rate of return on investment. As was so clearly said, governments have to make some tough choices. And making the right choice on what's the best investment for a good, healthy diet and a nutritional outcome is going to be key. And secondly, I would not underestimate the social cohesion point that was raised by the Minister of Rwanda, but recognize that that healthy diet and affordability of food goes far beyond schools alone. No child can only eat one meal a day, especially when they're young children, their stomachs are small. They need to eat a couple of times a day, even if it's small quantities. But that social cohesion element has a big point around affordable food that's healthy for populations. And I would just re-emphasize that right to nutritious diet and healthy food.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Before we go to the next panelist, I wanna highlight one thing which is also quite remarkable. We mentioned yesterday, I think one of the speakers this morning said, I think it was Roy actually, that said it's difficult to get anybody to agree on anything these days. We're quite fragmented as a world. And so this is one of the topics that potentially there's a lot of agreement on, where we can start with something positive, with some progress. That same thing is equally difficult for the UN system to do sometimes. It's difficult for the agencies to come together and work together. And I do want to make sure that you notice that we have had WFP, we had IFAD, we have had UNESCO, we have had UNICEF, and all of them have been in the room for 2 days discussing with us this topic. We've had also from UNICEF education and nutrition, and I really want to thank our UN colleagues that are here because this is also an issue that's bringing different agencies together to support governments in a unified way. Each of us have different things to offer, different comparative advantages, different ways in which we are supporting governments. But I want you to notice that one of the things that is quite evident to us during the summit is that you have a unified UN system that is coming at it from different angles to support countries with this topic. And I take that opportunity to say that because our next speaker is from FAO and our sister agency in Rome. And I also want to acknowledge the FAO colleagues that are with us today. They've been working with us very, very closely for the last 3 years. All of these agencies are members of the School Meals Coalition, of course. And so this really creates, again, a platform of UN cooperation for this topic. So my colleague, Mr. Al-Khafaji from FAO. The Food and Agriculture Organization has been working with us at all levels, a very important partner for governments at the country level, at the regional level, and at the headquarters level. And particularly one of the topics that we've been working very closely with you on is this issue of nutrition guidelines. What goes into these meals, and how do governments decide what are the standards, what are the acceptable meals that children should receive? A big part of that policy decision that governments need to make is what are children going to eat and what is appropriate for our countries. This is something that FAO has been leading, and I think the audience would like to know why that is so important, and potentially also this is an area of support that governments can reach out to from FAO and colleagues. We've been working very closely with you, so please, over to you.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Tout d'abord, juste pour remercier nos pays hôtes, la France, le coprésident, la Finlande, pour cet événement magnifique et extrêmement intéressant. Of course, also congratulations to the World Food Programme and all colleagues involved, our sister Rome-based agency, for this outstanding informative event. I really have to say, I've learned a lot in it. From FAO's perspective, of course, we are building on experience of more than 2 decades in the field of food and nutrition in schools, and we apply, and this is, I think, something that resonated throughout what we heard in these 2 days, a systemic approach, linking many aspects together. So linking school meals, which we heard are the largest procurement systems in the world, to the agri-food systems. We just heard from the Honorable Minister from Rwanda and also from the Sun movement on the social cohesion aspect. And I thought it was very interesting that words like defense, national security, peace were also used throughout the discussions. I think that is remarkable. We also heard of the challenges by Undersecretary General Duarte on fiscal space, and I think these are the realities that also need to be factored in. Coming back to your question now, yes, in fact, there is good evidence that when meal programs follow robust nutrition standards, these can better achieve the nutrition objectives. However, a global study conducted by FAO in 2019 with 33 low and middle income countries found out that there is no clear and validated methodology to establish nutrition standards for school meals. And in response to this, together with the World Food Programme and with the support of the German Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture, we are developing a step-by-step methodology on how to use data about what school children and adolescents in a country or region eat and their main nutrition vulnerabilities, together with evidence on diet-health relationships to make decisions on what school meals should provide in a specific context. And I think that's where the crux of the matter also lies. So the methodology will also integrate aspects of the school food system, which means also supply, procurement possibilities, and where possible, environmental footprint data, another part of the puzzle that we need to take into account. We need to make sure that the meals are not only nutritionally adequate, but also feasible and aligned with sustainable development objectives, as well as coherent with other school food environment and public procurement policies that are in place. So it's also, of course, a case-by-case matter. Further, we're trying to integrate what is important for children and adolescents into the process. For instance, having enough time to eat, learning core life food skills, and having a good eating environment for socialization. So next week, following the conclusion of this summit here, we will be releasing a call for young school food champions to help us advance this agenda within the most important group in this whole discussion, namely those who are entitled to a healthier, more sustainable and enjoyable meal in their schools. The methodology that I mentioned is being pilot tested with stakeholders from multiple sectors in Cambodia and Ghana to get feedback on the easiness of its use, as well as to create robust evidence on the positive effects of implementing such standards on children's diets. Allow me in this occasion to acknowledge and to thank His Excellency, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Education, Youth and Sports of Cambodia, who is with us today in this panel. It's a real honor, and also his words on systemic approach and evidence were certainly heard. The project I mentioned, in which the school meal nutrition standards methodology is being developed, has been designed based on FAO's holistic approach to school food and nutrition, which builds linkages between nutrition-sensitive value chains and inclusive procurement for school meals, food and nutrition education, and school food environment policies, all underpinned, and this is very important, by strong policy frameworks. And I think we heard also a lot about this in these days. This approach not only aims to improve food quality in the schools and children and adolescents' nutrition, but also to extend socio-economic benefits to local school communities. Once again, something that resonated in the interventions by many of the politicians and parliamentarians that we heard here. Now, in terms of FAO's commitment, we stand ready to support governments in optimizing the nutrition impacts of their school meal programs through the implementation of robust nutrition standards and child-centered food education. We also commit to support governments to efficiently link school meals with local production through sustainable and inclusive procurement. And finally, we stand ready to help develop holistic school food and nutrition policy and legal frameworks, another part of the puzzle, as said. All of this to make our agri-food systems more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable within the efforts of the school meals and nutrition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and so much support available from FAO. Thank you very much, and it's clear that FAO and en masse has made some very robust commitments to governments and to the ecosystem of the coalition. I realize that there's one question that I think is very important for you, Afshan. Nutrition for Growth is hosted here in France actually next year, and I know that Sun is at the heart of those conversations. When we were discussing this particular summit with the French government, this was a topic of conversation that came up, and so one of the things that we wanted you to also bring up is how is the conversation that's been happening for the last 2 days connected to that big event that happens next year.
Thank you very much, Carmen, for asking the question, and I was remiss in not mentioning it. So I think what we're also seeing is the importance of Sun as a movement to integrate the work around what's being done in school meals, but also with the forthcoming Olympics, how we can better integrate health, nutrition, and sports and education. And we've seen a lot of that work in several countries. I see the Deputy Minister for Education for Armenia. It's been one of the countries that's been very strong around this issue. So when I look at the school meals coalition, obviously there's been a number of very important elements that have been spoken about with respect to nutrition, with respect to education, with respect to social protection, with respect to food systems. And I think FAO's strong commitments here are part of that. When we come to the Nutrition for Growth Summit, we also really want to focus quite a bit, along with France as the hosts, on what can be done best so that countries very firmly have nutrition embedded across cross-sectoral areas. So we're working now. After this summit, we'll have some preliminary discussions with the government of France to see how do we work alongside countries so they come to that summit with a clear sense of commitments, but that those commitments are multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder. Because I think as we've heard from so many of the panelists today, that we need a life cycle approach. We need investment strategies that speak to both the domestic budget optimization, but also where is development assistance coming in, and not just from institutional government partners, but also from philanthropies, also from civil society, and also from the private sector. So the Sun movement benefits from having that coalition of a multi-stakeholder partnership that will allow us to leverage the many different stakeholders that can influence outcomes. And I do think having the presence of industry, business, and having the presence of civil society, like you did here, will be an important component to rounding out the full impact of the Nutrition for Growth Summit to look at a transformative system that includes school children as part of a much broader agenda.
Thank you. Thank you, and we look forward to that continuation of the discussion. To round out this conversation, and as you've seen, it's getting into a little bit of the weeds of really how the complexity of the implementation of these programs, the kind of support that we are getting requested from ministers, a lot of them here in the room, and the robust technical capacities that are available here on the stage, but also, of course, as I mentioned, the other UN agencies and partners that have been participating throughout the day. Now, we just heard this issue of, for example, how are we putting together guidelines? How are we putting together robust ways of ensuring that children are receiving the nutrition they need? How is that connected to procurement guidelines and legal frameworks, et cetera? So let's pretend that children get the right kind of nutrition that the guidelines say, and that we're giving them the inputs on nutrition that they deserve. Let's say that happens. The issue is, and this is for my next, my last speaker, we have no way of measuring whether that's making an impact on the health and nutrition status of this age group. We've been discussing this for a while, that we lack an indicator or a suite of indicators to understand how do we know whether the health and nutrition status of this age group, of the children beyond 5 years of age, if this is going in the right direction or not. So for my last speaker, I want to invite Robert Akparibo. You are the chair of one of the communities of practice that Don was mentioning, the Consortium's Nutrition Measurement Community of Practice, and you've been doing quite a bit of work around this issue. There's a huge gap that we have in terms of being able to measure whether our children are healthy and whether they're well nourished. So can you tell us a little bit about why that's important and what we're doing about it?
Okay, thank you. I think somebody said earlier on that when you are the last speaker, you have nothing to say, but I think I have something to say. I just wanted to say that in addition to my role as the chair of the Nutrition Community of Practice, I'm also a professor of nutrition at the University of Sheffield. And so this topic is an area of interest for me in terms of research. And I also want to highlight that there is a global special interest group for school health and nutrition, and I am a member of that coalition, a member of that interest group, but also co-chair of the interest group. So we are building a critical mass of experts to support this process. Now, let me just start by where Don said that when you look at the literature, there's only 10% of only 10% of the literature focused on school-age children and adolescents, and it is true because there's a challenge of indicators that, like you've just talked about. So there are lack of indicators, there are lack of, you can call them tools or measures, and if you don't have the tools to be able to make an assessment, how do you understand the problem? So how do you assess the scale of malnutrition in school-age children when you do not have the tools to be able to do that? How do you estimate the quality of meals? And I think over the last 2 days, we've been talking about meals, and then we also talk about quality of the meals. How do you assess the quality of the meals when you do not have the tools to be able to do that? How do you assess the wider school environment? Because I think children spend a large amount of their time in school rather than at homes. How do you assess the wider school food environment when you do not have the tools? So it is critical that we need to have tools that would help researchers, practitioners, whoever is involved in this topic or in this area of school meals to be able to gather the necessary data to be able to address the problem that we are talking about. Now, I think you will agree with me that because of the lack of data, I mean, I think we've been talking about data, and I'm really happy that the Data and Monitoring Initiative is going to build a database. I think Don mentioned that earlier. They are going to build a database or establish a database that will help us to understand, to be able to get data that can help us to monitor the progress and track impact of school meals programs globally. So it is something that is crucial. We need to talk about it. We need to move forward with it. Now, what I want to say in terms of how is the Nutrition Research Consortium, Nutrition Community of Practice addressing this problem? And I really appreciate and sympathize with countries when they talk about lack of data because of the lack of the instruments that we need to be able to do that. So one of the first initiatives of the Research Consortium was to establish or was to set up the Born Kits project. So which is, Born Kits simply means the biomarkers for nutrition and development. And this project was set up to be able to generate the evidence that we need that can inform or support the development of these indicators. And the project was led by our partners in the US. This project has now been completed, and we have started to disseminate the findings. In September, the Nutrition Community of Practice held a webinar to share the findings widely. What we are trying to do is, how do we translate the evidence that has been generated by the Born Case Project in helping not only even develop the indicators, but also promote nutrition in the first 1,000 days, but also the next 7,000 days. I think this has already been talked about, and I don't need to emphasize on it. What we are doing to address the nutrition for the first 1,000 days, but also subsequently the 7,000 days, is to engage with nutrition experts in countries and in the various countries through their networks. So, for example, the Asian Nutrition Society, the African Nutrition Society, the Pakistan Nutrition Society. So we are going to be engaging with this nutrition society so that they can promote nutrition among this age group. So I'll come back to the indicators. So we want to start from Africa, and what we are doing now is discussing the next steps. How do we translate the evidence to be able to develop these indicators and address the problems of nutrition in this age group? And so for Africa, what we have done is we've already started to discuss with the nutrition networks that are there. And I think the last time we had the research showcase, we kind of brought in some of the African counterparts. And of course, they've also been talking about local context data. And we want to see what can they generate in terms of data to be able to complement what has already been done, so that together we'll be able to address the problems. So there's this kind of, so that's the work that we are doing, and we hope that this will be scale up to the other countries or other continents, so that together we will be able to have the indicators that we are talking about. Otherwise, without these indicators, we might not be able to address, to have any meaningful data to address the problems.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. So lots of things that have been said. I know it's a lot. It's a lot of technical details, a lot of different aspects of how these programs are run. But we didn't want to, again, as we started with the first session of the summit, this is not just about political commitments. It's really about figuring out how to address the technical issues that are really challenging and challenges for governments around the world. So in this panel, what you've seen is just a bit, the tip of the iceberg of the enormous technical capacity that the coalition has in the form of partners, UN agencies, different pieces of the research community, and different technical experts that are available and supporting partners already. We're going to wrap up this session in a few minutes, but before I do, can I just ask both of you maybe for 1 minute of your last thoughts? Maybe let's start with Liesbet. Can you just maybe give us your concluding remarks?
I don't think, is this on? Great. So much has been said, and I don't think I can summarize it even in 1 minute. So I'd like to say, I'd like to mention one thing, and that is that I had a dinner a year or so ago, and I discovered something about the lady sitting on my left. It has to do with us all in the room, because bringing the coalition together has been an idea that has been in the heads of some people, and particularly Carmen Burbano on my left for many, many years. And she even took a break at some time, went to Harvard, studied how to collaborate, because we don't only need political will, we need the technical expertise, but we need to work together. And Carmen has discovered how to do that. So if you want technical advice on how to work together, please speak to Carmen, because she has brought she has brought us together as a family. We love working together. It's a partnership of agencies, of human beings, all putting our eye on the same target. And I personally feel very honored and grateful to be part of this. Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you so much. That was super generous. And that dinner was delicious. It was at your house. Don.
Well, how do you follow that one, right? So I wanted, one of the things about human beings is, include myself in this, is that we always think that how we are now is how we've always been. We're very poor at looking back and making assessments of things. But I just wanted to say, really, the world fully recognized the importance of school food programs worldwide when we closed them all. That's when we really got hold of that. 2 years ago, nearly 3, when the world closed all its schools and stopped all of these school-based health and nutrition interventions being delivered, that's when we realized how important they were. And that's when countries all over the world stood up and said, we need to do something about it. I mean, let's be clear, it was the countries, it was you who stood up and created this coalition. And I feel that, that was, let's say, 2 years ago. This is now the 2nd annual meeting of the coalition. And wow, it's bigger, better, more boisterous, and more effective. And you might think that, and what often happens when you have a crisis is everyone goes, oh dear, there's a crisis, and then the crisis goes away and everybody stops paying attention. But that's not where we are. We're on a trajectory that's moving up. We're on a trajectory where the world, for the first time, I think, is really getting perspective on the importance of investing in school children and adolescents in the whole, holistically investing in their education and in their well-being and their social welfare and their role in the human capital for our futures. I just wanted to share that with you. I think we're actually at a very important bifurcation in the way in which we think about society. Thank you.
Okay, well, I can't top that. So I'm just gonna thank you all for being here with us, for joining this crazy idea that maybe me and many others had, but the coalition doesn't exist without the member states, and their presence here for the last 2 days is a testament to that. Without the partners that you've heard throughout the 2 days, the civil society networks, the parliamentarians, the cities, UN agencies that are coming together on this really ambitious journey. So thank you all for joining us. I think George is coming over to the podium to tell us that we need to close this summit. And it's been an honor for me and the team in WFP to be your secretariat. We, as our executive director mentioned in her opening statement, commit to continuing to fulfilling that role. And for the next foreseeable future, we will be here to support you in the commitments that you have made today. We look forward to seeing you again 2 years from now in Brazil to take stock of where we are. Thank you so much.